Finally, we're in the race weekend, literally just hours away from Bahrain practice, qualifying, and the Grand Prix. And we get to start one of my favorite series of last year, and now continuing it with what upgrades have been brought for the weekend and what are teams bringing here to the Bahrain Grand Prix. Obviously, this is going to continue through the season, and little parts were brought here, obviously being in the first Grand Prix, but as more parts are brought, this is going to continue and be a bigger thing. So if you're new here, please give it a subscribe. That would mean the world for me. Thank you so much for the support on the channel. Give it a like also as well in the meantime, and comment down below what are your thoughts going into this Grand Prix. Now, with all these videos, like last year, I love to start them with the rear wings of the car. So let's get into Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, and McLaren, the rear wings that they've brought here. So each rear wing is a little bit different as the style is. Now with these pictures, what I love is you can compare the rear wings, but also look at every single side pod inlet. I mean, they're all different. Overcut for the Red Bull. The Mercedes has that P shape. The McLaren is close to the Baku Alpine ones. And then the Ferrari has kind of continued with that bigger sloping side pod, but it's got a little bit more of an underbite this year. As for the actual rear wings themselves, the Red Bull's got a medium to high load, which should prove sufficient with the car that's very little drag. The more load you have, the obviously you're going to be slower in a straight, but this car's a bullet in the straight anyways. I mean, at least that was the thought process with the RB19. Should be the same with the RB20. Now, if we look at the actual Mercedes has a medium wing, which is unusual considering their last cars always had high loads because those cars were just really bad in the rear end stability. Being able to actually run a medium wing is a good improvement for the Mercedes squad and new for them here on Bahrain. Now, as for the Ferrari, it's about medium to low. They are another team running here with a lower wing. There are a couple more that I'm about to show you in a bit. And McLaren is also like the Red Bull. Now, this one to me was a iffy choice. I'm assuming it's either tire degradation is not great for them, or they fixed the drag problem, but I don't think they fixed it to the point where they can compete with Red Bull. So it's a bit of an iffy situation for me that they've picked a medium to high downforce wing. Now, as for the other four teams, in this next picture, it's going to be RB, Aston Martin, Alpine, and Williams. So here, it's kind of a different trend here. It's more low-loaded wings with the RB and the Williams. They have more low-loaded, kind of like the Ferrari. We look at the Aston Martin, medium, exact same as the Mercedes. Some people were also looking at the side pod inlet saying it's an upgrade. No, it's the same thing as it was before. Even these inlets are also all completely different for the most part. Aston Martin with the most extreme version of it, and the Alpine also has kind of a medium to lowish, but more medium. I mean, this car has got a lot of new things that I don't think are going to improve it. In the last two teams to look at, which are probably our 10 and 9, Haas and Stake, they both have kind of similar rear wings, both medium, no medium to low. Nothing really in particular that stands out between these two rear wings. Now let's get into more parts on the track. A natural problem that was being talked about, especially in testing, because of those drain grates that kept getting out of the track because of drivers going over it, taking more curbs. They've actually painted over that and cemented that whole entire drain grate, so it shouldn't be going up like it was before. That's an improvement. Now on the actual cars themselves, a cool picture that Albert Ferrega actually put up was how much different this Aston Martin side pod is in comparison to before, how they've improved the actual slide pod water slide part of it. Now, obviously, very deep, but it doesn't have that curvature that the 2023 had. 2023 was a lot more closer to the side pod inlet. This is a lot further back, trying to concentrate that air really being pushed into the rear part of the car, and a bit more similar to what they had in the beginning of 2023. Now, in the beginning of 2023, that side pod was more pushed up, the actual water slide effect, but now it's even more pushed back to as much as they can probably get with this actual slide pod concept. Mercedes is also another team that's kind of, they've been going in between with the suspension. Now, obviously we know that the front wing now is legal. It was in question whether it's going to be legal or illegal, but it will be used. And if you look at this picture, something that stands out is kind of this front part of the nose cone. I'll point it out with a circle, but right there, it almost looks like the actual part of that front nose is kind of edging out. We don't know if this is a reflection from the image or if it's actually something that they've added onto the car. It wasn't there before, so it looks interesting and intriguing, but the actual suspension is the big thing to talk about, whether they went with that more anti-dive setup or not from day 1 and 2 or day 3. Well, they actually went with the day 1 and 2 setup because the driver said it was a better feeling driving the car in that time period here in Bahrain. Maybe that's because of the curbs. I wonder if on tracks like Spain, where there's not very many curbs, they're going to actually put that more anti-dive setup. We'll have to see what they do with this interchangeable setup, but it looks like through the season, they can pick where they want the anti-dive to be. Now getting into cooling. This is going to be a big talking point here in Bahrain. The first car we're going to look at is the Alpine. I mean, oh my goodness. You don't even have to be an expert to know that this is a lot. This is a lot of cooling. Man, they're probably going to run through like 7 or 8 engines, at least by the looks of it. They tried doing something in testing with way less of it, and now they go into the Grand Prix and they're like, all right, add on a whole bunch more. I'll tell you this, there are some teams that have gone to an extreme in the completely opposite way, and I'll point those out as well because Alpine, it's going to be a tough race here in Bahrain. Now, it's been for a couple years tough here, but I think this one in particular is going to be very tough. Next team cooling wise is Red Bull, kind of what you saw in the thumbnail. They've added a little bit more of these grates on the side, these kind of gills. And looking at this car from this side view, obviously we know this is cooling, but we've also talked about how this can actually go to the rear part of the car and how they're using the air from the engine cover part, kind of those halo shark fin inlets as what they're being talked about as. That part right there that's bringing the air and bringing it back down into the rear part of the car does cool the car just the slightest bit, but it also provides an airstream to the back of the car, which is super unique to anybody else on the grid. They do have cooling gills on the top of the engine cover. They're very slight and you can't see them from this view. Another thing that I wanted to point out though, from this view, you can see what some people are even calling like an engine cover slide pod. And honestly, it pretty much is. Look at how much the engine cover dips to provide more air to that beam wing. It's quite impressive and nobody has it to any degree like that. And another thing with the Red Bull and the Aston Martin actually for that case is the floors when looking at them are very similar with these 4 cutouts in the floor on the floor edge. And the wing that's separated on the floor actually looks very similar to that of the Red Bull as well. It's pretty similar, but different concepts in a slightly different way because there is a slide pod kind of also in the Red Bull. It's very interesting seeing the whole undercut aspect of these cars because the Aston is extreme in the side pod view. There's even a good view of it that Albert's taken of his car. It's a very extreme waterfall, and we'll have to see how they perform here because it is definitely a team that's been hidden. But also speaking about Aston Martin, a couple things. They brought a front wing here. Well, at least that's what we're assuming right now. A front wing is covered completely, and then there's one that's being shown. So maybe they've done something to that nose shape. We don't know why it's covered. I had a theory that they actually kind of just covered it for the reason of not wanting the dust to be settled into that front wing, but why didn't they cover the other one then at that point? Somebody said they were wearing a mask for COVID. I thought that was actually pretty funny because it really does look like it when it's on the front wing. It's going to be interesting to see what they do there, but how much performance you can really gain from the front nose shape, it's not really that much. So it's not a huge talking point, but something to mention. But what is a pretty big talking point, in my opinion, is they have no cooling gills. Like none at all. Maybe they're expecting a lot of the air to go through that side pod inlet and cool off the engine that way. They do have the shark fin, which also allows for a little bit of cooling, as you can see in this picture with the engine cover, but there aren't any gills on the side. And another team that's pretty close to that is Ferrari. Ferrari is actually really well done on its engine cover as well. Only 2 cooling gills, a big improvement to what they had of last year. Last year, you know that cooling was a big problem for them as well. Same in 22 with the whole entire engine blowups. So seeing as to how the reliability is being played here and how much they're going to that extreme to be able to push these cars is quite impressive. I do like that the Ferrari car has gone to that measure. Now to talk about the interior parts of the cars. These are pictures that we've been getting recently. So the first one I want to talk about is the Red Bull. Look at the extreme amount they've gone to actually push in those side pods. That packing is so nicely packaged. Because when you look at it on the Ferrari, obviously you can see that it's a lot different to that of the Red Bull, but the same thing with the Mercedes. Those cooling packages are done completely differently, also because they have that vertical inlet, so you see kind of how it's going to the back part of the car, what it's cooling, and why it's also going to the rear part of the car. You see how they've implemented this all so nicely and so efficiently. It's another thing that adds a lot of performance for these teams, and something that Red Bull has just nailed in these regulations. And it just seems like they're continuing to do a good job of that internal work that's really important for the car, especially weight saving wise and how you want to make the aerodynamic package. It's quite a thing of beauty to just look at seeing it from the pit lane, this interior work. Not to say that the Ferrari and Mercedes is anywhere far behind. Their work is beautiful as well, but this is a thing of beauty when you see how much cooling and how much more diverse that actual layout is on the Red Bull in comparison to the other pretty much top two teams when it comes to talking points like Ferrari and Mercedes. Whether it's on performance, we'll have to see. Another team to compare it to is also the McLaren car. As you can see, pretty much like the Ferrari and the Mercedes, very similar in that aspect in their interior cooling layout. That's really all that I have for Bahrain. There are some expected upgrades for McLaren, but they haven't really been showing their hand yet. They've been very quiet. We do know that they've brought some parts. Aston, as I said, we got to look out for this front wing, but everybody is pretty close to what they had in testing, and it'll be interesting to see throughout the season where everybody stands. I hope you guys are just as excited as me for this first race, and you guys keep up with the channel, and we continue to grow this channel together. Thank you so much for the support. Please leave a like, subscribe, it'd mean the world, and peace.